Hello, and welcome back to part two of brain-based learning, group A. Before we were talking about normal social development in teens and adolescents, and now we're going to talk about impaired social development in autism spectrum disorder. So for kids with autism spectrum disorder, the desire for social belonging is very real. Studies show that they do feel the need to have friends and succeed socially. But the skills that they need to have in order to do this are lacking. And there's a variety of reasons for this phenomenon, but it's kind of a cycle. The brain pathways that cause normal children to experience pleasure during social interactions are actually physically weaker in kids with autism spectrum disorder. So they find social interactions actually less appealing, even on a chemical level in the brain. In addition to this, their social experiences tend to be less successful because while typical teens are developing their own theory of mind, teens with autism spectrum disorder really have a hard time figuring out what others are feeling or what their intentions are. They have a really hard time with give and take conversations, so they can talk, but not necessarily listen and respond appropriately. They have a hard time understanding body languages and the nuances of language, so they may not be able to understand a joke because they may be taking it literally. They may bid for attention in ways that are socially inappropriate or will be perceived as odd by peers. And they have a hard time understanding that others have different experiences, interests, feelings, and beliefs than they do. And so these deficits cause social interactions to be less rewarding and just more awkward. And because of those two things, ASD kids may grow to avoid social interaction. Kind of depends on the kid. But love and loneliness are experienced by those with ASD just as with typically developing kids. ASD students self-report feeling more lonely than typically developing students. And additionally, ASD kids may be bullied, which can keep them from seeking friendships or can just lead them to be really confused. For kids with autism spectrum disorder, the opportunity for them to find friendships and develop them are just less frequent, and the relationships that they do develop tend to be of lesser quality because they're usually based around a common interest like Boy Scouts, or in the case of Charlie, if he could find another friend who was just obsessed with lizards, that would be amazing. But the chances of him finding someone who's as equally obsessed as he is are pretty remote. And in addition, there are increased levels of loneliness and depression in ASD students. So all of these things contribute to kids possibly avoiding social interactions. And because they have lower reward threshold for social interactions and lower success, they actually have fewer chances to practice social skills. So it's kind of a cycle that can cause a cascade effect. So if you have less inherent enjoyment and then you succeed less frequently and then you avoid social interactions, then you don't have as much practice as other kids do with getting better at social interactions. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. And it's harder for kids with ASD to develop in their social skills as a result. So going back to Charlie, he has some very specific social issues. He has a really hard time perceiving the intentions of others. So he thinks people are laughing with him, but actually they're laughing at him. He also does not know how to appropriately bid for attention. So he has a hard time joining and sustaining conversations in a way that does not come across as odd and weird to his peers. He doesn't understand the nuances of body language, so he makes either too much or too little eye contact. When you're speaking directly to him, he makes way too much eye contact and stands really close. But at other times he can make too little eye contact and just stares at the floor while he's talking or you're talking. He is really desperate to fit in, like I talked about earlier. He does have a desire for social success, but the fact that he's so desperate to fit in his case means that he's willing to be humiliated in order to be included. So sometimes he participates in behavior that is actually meant to make fun of him, and it's unclear, how much of the time he knows that this is the case and how much he doesn't know. So what can be done to help? Well, teachers and adults in Charlie's life can help him perceive the intentions of others. And there's a number of ways that this can happen. There are a lot of high quality social skills groups that are put on by like occupational therapy groups or other groups associated with ASD. The teachers and adults in Charlie's life can communicate well with his parents to help them understand some of the issues that he's having. A great way for a teacher or an adult in Charlie's life to help him understand what's happening socially is for them to show him comic strips. And we'll look at that in more detail in just a minute. And feedback from his teachers in teachable moments can be great for Charlie. So, if a teacher sees something and has the opportunity to step in and say, did you notice that someone, reacted to you this way? Maybe it's because of this. That would be terrific for him. And lastly, there are lots of books and student workbooks, and there's a list of resources at the end of this section to show those, and a couple of them in particular are really great for kids who have ASD. Number 2, the teachers and adults in Charlie's life can help develop ways for him to appropriately bid for attention. And the words are kind of blurry here, but I'm going to read them. So this kid with ASD is thinking, all the kids are talking together and I want to talk with them. And in order to do that, he says something odd and very awkward to his peers. He says, I'm wearing Star Wars underwear. And of course his peers are thinking, I wish he wouldn't, I can't even read it. They're saying, I wish he wouldn't talk about that. It's so awkward. I don't know what to say. And then the other one's thinking, I don't like it when he interrupts. So this would be a great situation for Charlie to see some comic strips that can help him figure out, what's a socially appropriate way to join a conversation. Or for Charlie's teacher to step in and say, give him an idea of maybe what a different way to join that conversation would be. Like maybe you should listen first and see what they're talking about before you just jump in with, I'm wearing Star Wars underwear. Another thing that adults in Charlie's life can help him understand is the body language of others. So Charlie has a really difficult time telling, if he's annoying people. He doesn't seem to be able to tell. He will just continually keep doing what he's doing, and then when his peers snap at him, he's bewildered and confused because he doesn't understand their body language. He doesn't understand that for the last 3 minutes while you've been doing this annoying thing, your peers have been backing away from you, they've been rolling their eyes, they're showing all these signs that they're getting frustrated and irritated, and he just can't tell. So a great way to help him with this would be, again, some of those resources that are listed at the end of this section and workbooks, and for his teacher to say, Charlie, I don't think that so-and-so likes it when you're doing that. You see how they're backing away from you and rolling their eyes? I think you should probably try a different way to relate. And lastly, teachers and adults in Charlie's life can help him fit in, but in a way that does not compromise his worth and dignity. And this is a great quote from Sonika Polker, who says, it's better to have no friends rather than fake friends. And for Charlie, this is going to be a difficult thing for him to understand and implement, but one of the books in particular at the end of this section is really great at helping kids understand that it's not worth it to have friends that are secretly making fun of you or, humiliating you in some way. And it really is important to fit in a way that does not compromise your worth and your dignity. It's worth waiting for good friends than to just have a bunch of friends who kind of talk down to you. So here are 3 great social skills resources for ASD kids and their parents. This one in the middle of this Look Me in the Eye is more for parents, but these two on either side are great for high schoolers. I've read both of these myself. One is the Asperkids Secret Book of Social Rules, and this talks a lot about, has a lot of those comic strips, how kids can relate better to their peers. And then this one, this Asperger's Rules, is more of a workbook for kids that helps them think through social interactions and interactions with teachers in the classroom. Last but not least, Charlie has some difficulties in academic development, and transitioning to middle school can be hard for anybody. But for kids with autism spectrum disorder, it's even harder because so many things are changing. So the campus is bigger, the student has a lot of multiple teachers instead of just one classroom teacher. The content is more complex, and as we discussed earlier, the social situation is more complex. ASD students, like all of us, have some subjects that they do great in and some that they don't. And a supportive teacher and parent can really help an autistic student in the areas where they struggle academically. One of the areas where autistic students in general struggle, but certainly Charlie, is written expression. People with autism have a really hard time sometimes getting their getting words from their head onto the paper. And they, in addition to that, they struggle with organization as well. So it can be really hard for them to even organize their thoughts long enough to get it written down. So to help with this, the adults in Charlie's life can help him use graphic organizers to plan out how he's going to write his assignments. Sometimes they can allow him to use assistive technology, so it might be easier to speak what he wants to say instead of writing it. In some cases, that can be really helpful for kids with autism. It's important that as Charlie's teachers are interacting with him, they're using small, simple steps to teach him how to write. So they're actually breaking it down into and scaffolding his writing projects really well. Again, modeling how to write paragraphs. And then it's also important that they incorporate the vocabulary that he's learning into reading and writing curriculum, so that he has the vocabulary he needs. In addition, handwriting for students with autism can really be a struggle. In fact, sometimes it's a way that I can sort of understand, like, oh, this student is autistic, look at his handwriting. Obviously, that's not a complete indicator, but it's definitely a piece of the picture. So students with autism struggle with their handwriting, and that can cause them to act out when they're asked to write. Certainly in Charlie's situation, he has a really hard time with writing. So some ways to help this is to use grip aids or weighted pens and pencils, and other kinds of tactile or special instruments that give them more sensory cues while they're writing. When it comes to math, a lot of students with ASD are really gifted. They can memorize facts, but they do have a hard time applying the information and facts that they gain when it comes to actually solving problems. So there are some great ways that teachers can help students who are autistic in math. So one way is to use a lot of visual aids or manipulatives, which gives students a chance to visually see what they're doing. It's great for teachers to give students a way to work their problems one step at a time instead of being just really overwhelmed by this huge word problem or a bunch of steps. It's good for kids to write it out, to make a plan before they start to just jump in and plug in a bunch of numbers. Math games can be really effective, especially if math isn't the favorite subject. Charlie happens to be good at it, but that's not always the case. You can make sure to praise them when they do well, so that they associate math with good feelings. And you can take breaks. So students can become, especially ASD students, can become really overstimulated and they need to relax before they can move on. In general, here are some great tips for teaching students with autism. Avoiding sensory overload, using lots of visuals, and being predictable, keeping the language concrete so that they don't have to interpret everything, teaching social skills, and treating the students as individuals. Here is a list of our references, and thank you for listening.